They called him crazy for buying a concrete tomb. What they didn't know was that the tomb wasn't empty. A veteran bought an abandoned bunker, but what he found inside changed his life. Robert Kane stood in the dusty government auction yard, holding his last $10 while the wealthiest men in Ridgefield laughed at him. The auction had just ended and somehow, impossibly, he had won the bid on the old Cold War bunker 15 miles outside town. $10. That was all it took. That was all he had. Marcus Webb, owner of Webb Construction and half the commercial real estate in the county, wiped tears from his eyes. Beside him, other contractors in expensive boots shook their heads. None of them understood what Robert had noticed during his brief inspection the week before. The bunker sat half buried in the desert, its concrete walls cracked and weathered by 40 years of abandonment. The massive steel door hung at an angle, its hinges rusted but still intact. Every contractor had walked past it, dismissing it as worthless government surplus. The auction listing called it a decommissioned communications post, suitable only for scrap or demolition. But Robert had seen something they hadn't, something that made his hands shake as he counted his meager bills. During his inspection, he had noticed the ventilation pipes. They were rusted on the outside, yes, but when he put his hand near them, he felt air moving. Not wind, not natural circulation, mechanical airflow. Filtered air being pushed through a system that should have been dead for decades. Someone, or something, had kept the life support running. As the crowd dispersed, still muttering about the foolish old man who threw away his grocery money, Robert approached his purchase. The key the auctioneer gave him was heavy, official-looking, with a tag that read, "Surface level only." That phrase stuck in his mind. Surface level, meaning there were other levels, deeper levels. Behind him he heard Webb talking to his foreman. Something about the property being perfect for a storage facility once they cleared the old structure. But there was something off in Webb's voice. Not disappointment at losing the bid, something else. Relief, maybe. Or nervousness. Robert inserted the key into the surface lock. It turned smoothly, too smoothly for a mechanism that was supposed to be frozen with rust and neglect. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss that made him step back. Pressurized seals releasing. In a building that was supposed to be abandoned. He stepped inside. The entrance corridor was exactly as he remembered from his inspection. Concrete walls covered in peeling paint and decades of dust. Emergency lighting fixtures hanging loose from the ceiling. Everything screamed abandonment and decay. But as he walked deeper, his boots echoing in the narrow space, he noticed details that didn't fit. The dust on the floor showed patterns. Not footprints exactly, but disturbances, like something had been dragged through regularly. And on the walls, beneath the grime, were markings, numbers painted in faded yellow. Robert pulled a small flashlight from his jacket. The numbers weren't random. They were measurements, depth markers, the kind used in military installations to help personnel navigate underground complexes. And they were counting down, indicating he was descending even though the floor felt level. At the end of the entrance corridor was another door. This one was different, heavier, newer looking despite the dust covering it, and it had no keyhole. Instead, there was a numeric keypad, its LED display dark, but not broken. Just waiting. Robert reached out and touched the keypad. Nothing happened. He tried the obvious combinations. 0, 0, 0, 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing. The door remained sealed. He was about to give up when he noticed something else. Scratched into the concrete beside the door, almost invisible under the dust, were more numbers. 7 digits. They looked like they had been carved with something sharp, done quickly, desperately, like someone leaving a message. His heart pounding. Robert punched the numbers into the keypad. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the LED display flickered to life, glowing green. Deep inside the door, locks began to disengage, heavy bolts sliding back. Mechanisms that had been waiting for exactly this combination. The door opened 6 inches and stopped. From the gap came air. Cool, filtered, circulated air. And with it, a smell. Not decay or mold or the mustiness of abandonment. Something else. Something lived in. The smell of habitation. Of someone existing in an enclosed space for a very, very long time. Robert's hands were shaking now. "Hello?" His voice echoed down into darkness beyond the door. Silence. Then from somewhere deep below, a sound. Mechanical. Regular. like breathing but too slow, too deliberate. The rhythm of life support systems, oxygen generators, air scrubbers, all running, all active. He pulled the door wider and shined his light down. A staircase descended into blackness. The depth markers on the wall continued. 40 feet, 60 feet, numbers that meant this bunker went far deeper than any communications post should go. Robert started down the stairs. Each step echoed. The air grew cooler. The mechanical sounds grew louder. And on the walls, more markings appeared. Not numbers now. Dates. Scratched into the concrete like a prisoner counting days. The dates started in 1985. They continued, month after month, year after year. Thousands of marks. Tens of thousands. Someone had been down here counting every single day for nearly 40 years. At the bottom of the stairs was a third door. This one was open. Beyond it, lights were on. Fluorescent tubes humming with electricity that shouldn't exist. Robert stepped through into a room that defied everything the surface had promised. The space was clean, organized, lived in. A cot with military-issue blankets folded precisely. A small table with a single chair. Shelves lined with ration packages, their labels faded but readable. And in the corner, next to a bank of ancient computer equipment that still glowed with active displays, sat a man. He was thin, almost skeletal. His hair had gone completely white. His uniform, though clean, was decades out of date. And when he looked up at Robert, his eyes held a mixture of hope and terror that made Robert's stomach turn. The man stood slowly, came to attention, and saluted with a hand that trembled from disuse. "Lieutenant Kane?" His voice was rough, unused to speaking. "Sir, I've maintained my post as ordered. The package remains secure. Do you have my exit authorization?" Robert felt the world tilt. He knew that voice, knew that face, though it had aged beyond recognition. 40 years ago, he had been a young lieutenant giving orders he barely understood. And one of those orders had been to a fresh-faced private named James Rivera. Guard the package. Await confirmation before abandoning post. Robert had walked away, assuming the confirmation would come through proper channels. He had followed his own orders and moved on to the next assignment, the next mission, the next chapter of a career that eventually ended in retirement and a trailer park in Nevada. He had never looked back, never questioned, never checked. And James Rivera had waited. For 40 years he had waited for a confirmation that never came. "Oh God," Robert whispered. "Jimmy, what have they done to you?" Rivera's salute remained frozen in place. His arm trembled from holding the position. His eyes never left Robert's face, waiting for the proper response that military protocol demanded. Robert's throat tightened. 40 years ago, he would have returned the salute without thinking. But now, looking at what his orders had created, the gesture felt like a mockery. Still Rivera was waiting, still following the rules, still being the soldier Robert had told him to be. Robert raised his hand and returned the salute. Rivera lowered his arm with visible relief. "At ease, Private," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rivera's posture relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained alert, watching, assessing. "Sir, forgive me for asking, but why are you in civilian clothes? Is this part of the extraction protocol?" Robert looked down at his worn jeans and faded jacket. Extraction protocol. The words felt like knives. "Jimmy, what year do you think it is?" Rivera blinked, confused by the question. "Sir, it's 1985, November 7th, 2200 hours. I've maintained accurate timekeeping as required by standing orders." "Look at me, son," Robert said gently. "Really look at me. How old was I when you last saw me?" Rivera's eyes narrowed, studying Robert's face. The deep wrinkles, the white hair, the age spots on his hands. For the first time, doubt crept into his expression. "I don't understand, sir. You look—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "It's not 1985 anymore, Jimmy. It's 2025. You've been down here for 40 years. The words hung in the air like poison. Rivera's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, horror. Then, strangely, a forced calm that was worse than panic. "That's not possible, sir. I've been counting every day I have records." He moved to the table where dozens of notebooks were stacked in precise order. He grabbed the top one and opened it. Page after page of tally marks, dates, notes about system maintenance and ration consumption. I know you've been counting, Robert said. I saw the marks on the walls. But Jimmy, you've been counting for 40 years. Nobody ever sent the confirmation. Nobody ever came to relieve you. Rivera's hands shook as he held the notebook. My orders were clear. Guard the package. Maintain the post. Await confirmation before abandoning position. I followed my orders, sir. I did everything right. I know you did, Robert said, and the guilt in his voice was overwhelming. You did everything right. We're the ones who failed you. Rivera set the notebook down carefully, his movements precise and controlled. Too controlled. Like a man holding himself together by force of will alone. The package. I need to show you the package. You need to verify that I maintained security protocols. He walked to the far corner of the room where a heavy vault door was set into the wall. He began working the combination lock, his fingers moving automatically through a sequence he had probably checked thousands of times. Jimmy, you don't have to. Inspection is part of extraction protocol, sir, Rivera interrupted, his voice taking on a mechanical quality. I must demonstrate that I successfully completed my mission before I can be relieved. The vault opened. Inside was a reinforced container about the size of a footlocker. Warning labels covered every surface. Radiation symbols, biohazard markers, hazardous material designations in multiple languages. Robert felt his blood run cold. What is that? I don't know, sir, Rivera replied. My orders were to guard it, not to open it. I was told it was critical to national security. That's all I needed to know. Robert moved closer, reading the labels. The container was from a program he vaguely remembered hearing about during his service. Something about nuclear materials. Something that had been classified above his clearance level. Has anyone else been down here? Robert asked. In all these years, has anyone come to check on you? No, sir. The automated supply drops continued on schedule for the first 10 years. Food, water purification tablets, replacement parts for the life support systems. Then they stopped. But I had already established rationing protocols. I made the supplies last. 10 years. They had kept him supplied for 10 years and then just stopped. Forgotten about him. Or decided he was expendable. Either option was unforgivable. The systems, Robert said, looking at the glowing equipment. How did you keep everything running? For the first time, Rivera showed something like pride. I taught myself, sir. The manuals were here. I studied. I learned to repair the generators, the air scrubbers, the water recyclers. When parts failed, I fabricated replacements from other systems. I maintained operational readiness. He had survived by sheer determination and ingenuity. Alone in the dark for 40 years, he had kept himself and his mission alive through nothing but willpower and duty. Robert felt sick. Jimmy, I need to tell you something. I was the officer who gave you these orders. I'm the one who told you to wait for confirmation. Rivera looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the aged face to the young lieutenant from decades ago. Recognition dawned slowly. Lieutenant Kane, he whispered. You told me this was important. You told me someone would come. I know, Robert said. I thought they would. I followed my orders and moved on to my next assignment. I never questioned it. I never checked. And that's on me, son. That's my failure. Rivera was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small. What happened up there? In the world? The Cold War ended, Robert said. The Soviet Union collapsed. Everything we were fighting against just dissolved. And programs like this one, secret installations like this bunker, they got buried in paperwork and forgotten. So my mission was for nothing? No, Robert said firmly. Your mission was to guard that container, and you did. For 40 years you did your duty without question. That's not nothing. That's everything. But now it's time to come home. Rivera looked around the room that had been his entire world. Home? I don't even know what that means anymore, sir. Before Robert could respond, a sound echoed from above. Footsteps on the metal stairs. Someone was coming down. Robert moved to the door and looked up the stairwell. A man in an expensive suit was descending, followed by two others in tactical gear. Marcus Webb, and he wasn't smiling anymore. Mr. Kane, Webb called down, his voice echoing. I'm afraid I can't let you leave with what you found. This is a matter of national security. Webb descended the stairs with the confidence of a man who held all the power. The two men behind him weren't construction workers. They moved like military contractors. Professionals. Their hands rested casually near concealed weapons. Robert stepped between Webb and the room where Rivera stood. "This is private property, Webb. You're trespassing." Webb reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped just outside the doorway. His eyes moved past Robert, taking in the active equipment, the supplies, and finally landing on Rivera. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He had known, or at least suspected. "Private property," Webb repeated with a thin smile. "Interesting legal position, Mr. Kane. Tell me, when you purchased this bunker, did the government disclose everything it contained? Did they mention active systems? Classified materials? Personnel?" The word personnel hit like a slap. Webb knew Rivera was here. Maybe not the details, but he knew someone or something had been left behind. "How long have you known?" Robert asked quietly. Webb glanced at his watch. "Does it matter? What matters is that this situation needs to be contained. Quietly. Efficiently. For everyone's benefit." Rivera moved forward, his posture rigid. "Sir, I don't understand. If you're with the government, where are my relief orders? Where is my discharge paperwork?" Webb looked at Rivera with something like pity. "Son, there are no orders. There is no paperwork. Officially, you don't exist. This facility doesn't exist. And that container you've been guarding for 40 years was supposed to have been destroyed in 1987. Destroyed." Rivera repeated, the word hollow in his mouth. "A clerical error," Webb continued, his tone businesslike. "The disposal order got lost in bureaucratic shuffle. The program was classified, then it was forgotten. These things happen during transitions of power, during budget cuts, during reorganizations." Robert felt rage building in his chest. "These things happen? You're talking about a man's life, 40 years of his life. I'm talking about national security." Webb shot back. "That container holds material that cannot be acknowledged. If word gets out that the government lost track of it, that we left it in an unmanned bunker for 4 decades, the political fallout would be catastrophic, not to mention the security implications." "So your solution is what?" Robert demanded. "Bury it again? Pretend we never found it?" "My solution is to do what should have been done 40 years ago. Secure the material, seal the facility, make it disappear from all records." Webb's eyes moved to Rivera. All records. The implication was clear. Rivera had become a liability, a witness to governmental negligence on an unforgivable scale. Rivera's voice was steady, but his hands shook. "Are you ordering me to remain at my post, sir? I'm saying that your service, while admirable, has reached its conclusion. There are protocols for situations like this. Protocols that protect everyone involved." "Protocols," Robert said coldly. "You mean making him disappear? Just like you made this bunker disappear. Just like you made that container disappear." Webb's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand the complexity of this situation, Kane. I'm trying to help. The alternative is far worse for everyone, especially for Private Rivera. Do you think the media would treat him kindly? A man who followed orders so blindly he wasted 40 years in a hole? They'd make him a laughingstock, a symbol of military brainwashing." It was a clever argument. Cruel, but clever. Offering to protect Rivera by keeping him hidden. Rivera spoke up, his voice stronger now. "Respectfully, sir, I'd rather be a laughingstock than a ghost." Webb's expression hardened. "That's not your decision to make anymore, Private. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us." "No," Robert said. "It's not. It's exactly as big as one man following orders and being abandoned by the system that gave them. And I'm not letting you bury this." Webb sighed. "I hoped we could resolve this reasonably. Jenkins, Carter, please escort Mr. Kane and the private to the surface. We'll continue this discussion in a more official setting." The 2 contractors moved forward. Robert raised his hands but didn't move. "Before your men put hands on us, you should know something. I made a call before I came down here. To a friend who works at the Ridgefield Herald. I told her I found something interesting in my bunker. She's curious. Journalists always are. It was a bluff." Robert hadn't called anyone, but Webb didn't know that. Webb's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Robert admitted. "But are you willing to bet your clean little cover-up on it? Because if a reporter shows up and finds this place sealed with us inside, that's going to raise questions. The kind of questions that lead to investigations." For a long moment, nobody moved. Webb's mind was clearly working through scenarios, calculating risks. Finally, he pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call. To people with more authority than me." He gestured to his men. Watch them. They don't leave this room. Webb climbed back up the stairs, his voice already talking urgently to someone as he disappeared from view. Robert turned to Rivera. "How are you holding up, son?" Rivera looked at the container in the vault, then at the room that had been his prison. "Sir, I need to know something. Did I do the right thing? Staying here all these years? Following my orders? Was it worth it?" Robert wanted to lie, wanted to tell him it was noble and heroic, but Rivera deserved the truth. "No," Robert said quietly. "It wasn't worth it. Your orders were given by people who didn't think about consequences, who didn't plan for contingencies, who treated you like a chess piece and forgot you were a human being. You did nothing wrong, Jimmy, but the system that put you here did everything wrong." Rivera nodded slowly, processing this. "Then what do we do now?" "We make sure they can't bury this again," Robert said. "We make sure the world knows what happened to you. Not because I want revenge, but because there might be others. Other forgotten installations. Other soldiers still waiting for orders that will never come." Before Rivera could respond, Webb's voice echoed down from above. "Kane, you need to hear this." Robert climbed the stairs. Webb stood at the top, his phone still in his hand. His face had gone pale. "I just spoke with someone very high up in defense," Webb said quietly. "They want to offer a deal. I'm listening. They'll acknowledge the facility. They'll acknowledge Rivera. They'll provide full medical care, back pay, honorable discharge, the works. But the container stays classified. It gets removed quietly, disposed of properly, and never mentioned in any official report. And if I say no?" Webb's expression was grim. "Then they'll classify all of this under national security. You and Rivera will be detained, possibly indefinitely. They have that authority." Robert looked back down the stairs where Rivera stood in the doorway, watching, waiting, still following orders because it was all he knew. "I need to talk to him," Robert said. "This is his life, his choice." Webb checked his watch. "You have 10 minutes, then I need an answer." Robert descended the stairs and found Rivera standing exactly where he had left him. Not pacing, not anxious, just waiting. 40 years had taught him patience that most people could never understand. "Jimmy, we need to talk about what happens next." Rivera nodded. "I heard some of it, sir. They want to make a deal. They're offering you everything you should have had 40 years ago. Medical care, back pay, discharge, recognition. But the container stays secret. Nobody ever knows what you were really guarding." Rivera walked to the vault and looked at the container that had defined his entire adult life. "What's in it, sir? Really?" "I don't know exactly," Robert admitted. "But based on the labels, it's probably nuclear material. Maybe from a weapons program. Maybe from a reactor. Something they couldn't dispose of properly, so they hid it and hoped everyone would forget. And I was the lock on that hope," Rivera said quietly. "Yes." Rivera closed the vault door with a soft click. "If we take their deal, what happens to places like this, to other soldiers who might be waiting somewhere?" It was the question Robert had been dreading. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe they get forgotten too. And if we refuse the deal? They classify everything, detain us. Possibly for a long time. We become the problem they make disappear." Rivera turned to face him. His eyes, which had seemed lost and confused earlier, now held a strange clarity. "Sir, can I tell you what the worst part was? It wasn't the loneliness. It wasn't the same food every day or the recycled air or the walls closing in. It was wondering if I mattered. If anyone up there remembered I existed. If my mission meant anything at all." His voice cracked slightly. "For 40 years I told myself that someone would come, that I was important enough to remember. And then you walked through that door, and I thought finally someone came. But they didn't come for me, did they? They came because you bought this place by accident." Robert felt the words like physical blows. "Jimmy." "No, sir, let me finish. I need to say this." Rivera's hands were shaking, but his voice stayed steady. "I lost 40 years of my life following orders. I don't get those back. No amount of money or medical care or apologies changes that. But what I can do is make sure it means something. Make sure no one else gets forgotten like I was. If we refuse their deal, you might never see freedom," Robert warned. "They have the power to lock you up in a different kind of hole. With respect, sir, I've been in a hole for 40 years. At least this time I'd be there for a reason I chose, not because someone forgot about me." Robert looked at this man who had been robbed of everything but somehow still had more courage than most people ever found. "You're sure?" "I stopped being sure of anything around year 20, Rivera said with a ghost of a smile. "But I know what's right. And keeping this secret isn't right. Robert pulled out his phone. Then we do this properly. No more bluffs. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 15 years. A reporter he had served with in the army, who now worked for a national news network. The call was brief. Robert explained just enough to guarantee interest. A forgotten soldier. A sealed bunker. A government cover-up. The reporter promised to have a crew there within 3 hours. When Robert ended the call, Webb was already coming back down the stairs. His face was dark with anger. "What did you just do?" "I called a reporter," Robert said calmly. "National network. They'll be here soon. You have a choice now, Webb. You can wait for them and explain why you're trying to seal 2 American citizens in a bunker. Or you can leave and let this play out in public." Webb's jaw worked soundlessly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Kane. Both of your lives. They will destroy you for this." "Maybe," Robert agreed. "But at least people will know why. At least Jimmy's story will be told." "His story?" Webb laughed bitterly. "You think the public will see him as a hero? They'll see a fool who wasted his life following orders. They'll mock him, use him as a punchline. Is that what you want for him?" Rivera stepped forward. "What I want is for people to know the truth. If they mock me, that's their choice, but at least they'll know I existed, that I mattered enough to talk about." Webb looked between them, realizing he had lost. His phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, then his face went pale. "Yes, sir. I understand." He ended the call and looked at Robert with barely contained fury. "My superiors have decided to cut their losses. A team is being dispatched to secure the container. You two are to remain here until they arrive. After that, you're free to tell whatever story you want." "Just like that?" Robert asked suspiciously. "Just like that," Webb confirmed. "Apparently, someone very high up decided that the political cost of detaining you outweighs the cost of letting the story go public. Congratulations, Kane. You won." But Webb's expression said this wasn't a victory. It was something else. "What aren't you telling us?" Robert demanded. Webb smiled coldly. "You'll find out soon enough. But here's a hint. That container you've been guarding, Rivera, the one you think makes you important, it's empty. Has been since 1983. The material was relocated to a secure facility before you were even stationed here. Your entire mission was paperwork lag, a bureaucratic error that nobody bothered to correct because it was easier to forget about you than file the discharge papers." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rivera's face went blank. "Empty? Empty," Webb confirmed. "You spent 40 years guarding nothing. You sacrificed everything for a mistake nobody cared enough to fix. Sleep well with that knowledge." Webb turned and climbed the stairs. His contractors followed. Within minutes, the bunker was silent again except for the hum of life support systems. Rivera walked slowly to the vault, opened it, stared at the container covered in warning labels and official seals. 40 years of his life reduced to a clerical error. Robert didn't know what to say. There were no words that could make this better. Finally, Rivera spoke. His voice was eerily calm. "Sir, I need you to leave now." "Jimmy, don't do anything." "I'm not going to hurt myself," Rivera interrupted. "I just need to be alone, to process this. Please, sir, just go." Robert hesitated, then nodded. He climbed the stairs and emerged into the desert sunset. The beauty of it felt wrong somehow. Inappropriate. His phone buzzed. The reporter, 2 hours away. Robert sat on the ground outside the bunker entrance and waited. Inside, Rivera was alone with the truth. Outside, Robert was alone with his guilt. And somewhere in Washington, people who had forgotten about James Rivera 40 years ago were now scrambling to manage a story they never wanted told. The news crew arrived exactly when promised. 3 vehicles carrying reporters, cameramen, and enough equipment to broadcast live if needed. Robert met them at the bunker entrance as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The lead reporter was Sarah Chen, the woman Robert had served with 3 decades ago. She was older now, gray streaking her black hair, but her eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had made her a good soldier and a better journalist. "Robert Kane," she said, extending her hand. "When you called, I thought you were finally losing it, but this..." She looked at the bunker entrance with professional assessment. "This is real?" "It's real," Robert confirmed. "But Sarah, before we go down there, you need to understand something. The man you're about to meet has been through hell. He's fragile right now. He just learned that everything he sacrificed was for nothing. Sarah's expression softened. We'll be respectful. You have my word. They descended into the bunker together. Robert led them through the corridors, past the depth markers and scratched dates, down to the room where Rivera had spent 40 years of his life. Rivera was sitting at his small table, his hands folded in front of him. He had changed into a clean uniform, one he must have kept preserved for this exact moment. His face was composed, but his eyes were red. He stood when they entered and came to attention. Sarah stopped in the doorway, her professional demeanor cracking for just a moment. She had seen combat zones, disaster sites, human tragedy in every form. But something about this clean room with its precisely organized supplies and the man standing at attention broke through her reporter's armor. "Private James Rivera," she said gently. "I'm Sarah Chen with National News Network. Would you be willing to tell me your story?" Rivera glanced at Robert, who nodded encouragement. "Yes, ma'am," Rivera said. "I'd like that." The interview took 2 hours. Rivera spoke about his orders, his mission, the years of waiting. He showed them his notebooks filled with daily entries. He demonstrated how he had kept the systems running. He explained his rationing protocols and his maintenance schedules. And when Sarah asked him how he felt learning that the container was empty, that his mission had been meaningless, Rivera was quiet for a long time. "I don't think it was meaningless," he finally said. "I think it was a test I didn't know I was taking. A test of whether I was the kind of man who keeps his word even when nobody is watching, even when it costs everything. I passed that test. The fact that the people who gave it to me didn't deserve that kind of loyalty doesn't change what I proved to myself." Sarah's cameraman had tears running down his face behind his equipment. When the interview ended, Sarah pulled Robert aside. "This is going to be massive. National headlines. International, probably. Are you both ready for that?" "I don't know if anyone's ever ready," Robert admitted. "But it's the right thing to do." "There's something else you should know," Sarah said quietly. "I made some calls while we were driving here, to sources in defense. They're already preparing their response. They're going to claim this was an isolated incident, a tragic mistake but not indicative of systemic problems. Of course they are. But here's the thing. My sources also told me about 7 other installations, smaller than this one, decommissioned during the same period, and nobody can account for whether they were properly cleared before being sealed." Robert felt cold. 7 others. Could be nothing, Sarah said. Could be paperwork errors. Or could be 7 more James Riveras waiting for orders that will never come. That night, the story broke. By morning, it was on every news channel. The bunker was surrounded by media, government vehicles, and protesters demanding answers. A team from defense arrived to retrieve the container. They worked with practiced efficiency, careful to avoid the cameras. Robert watched them load it into an armored truck. This thing that had defined Rivera's life but turned out to be empty. A Pentagon spokesperson held a press conference. She expressed deep regret for the administrative failures that led to Private Rivera being overlooked. She announced a full review of all decommissioned facilities from the Cold War era. She promised that this would never happen again. Nobody believed her promises, but at least they were asking the right questions now. 3 days later, a military transport arrived to take Rivera to Walter Reed Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. He stood at the bunker entrance, looking back at the structure that had been his entire world. "Strange," he said to Robert. "I spent 40 years wanting to leave this place. Now that I can, part of me doesn't know how." "You take it one day at a time," Robert replied. "Like you did down there, except now you get to choose where you go and what you do." Rivera turned to him. "What will you do, sir? With the bunker?" Robert had been thinking about that. "I'm going to turn it into a memorial. Not just for you, but for every soldier who got lost in the bureaucracy. Every person the system forgot. We'll make sure people remember." Rivera nodded slowly. "I'd like to help with that. When I'm ready. When I've figured out how to live in a world with internet and smartphones and everything else I missed." "The offer stands whenever you want it," Robert said. They shook hands and Rivera climbed into the transport. As it drove away, Sarah approached Robert. "I got a call an hour ago," she said, "from a woman in Montana. She says her father worked at one of those 7 installations I mentioned. He was supposed to retire in 1987. She hasn't heard from him since '86. Robert closed his eyes. Jesus. The government is denying it, saying he retired properly and his daughter is mistaken. But she has letters, documentation, and she wants to go to that installation and check. Will they let her? They can't stop her if it's decommissioned and sold like yours was. Sarah paused. She asked if you would come with her. She trusts you now, because of what you did for Rivera. Robert looked back at the bunker entrance. 40 years ago, he had given an order and walked away. He had trusted the system to handle the details. That trust had cost James Rivera everything. When do we leave? He asked. 6 months later, Robert stood in what had become the National Cold War Memorial. The bunker had been transformed. The underground room where Rivera lived was preserved exactly as it had been, a testament to endurance and duty. But new sections had been added. Walls covered with names, soldiers who had been forgotten, facilities that had been sealed with people still inside. They had found 3 more. 2 had not survived. One, a woman who had been a communications specialist, had lived for 32 years in a facility in Alaska before they found her. She was with Rivera now, both of them learning to live in a world that had moved on without them. Rivera stood beside Robert, looking at the memorial wall. He had gained some weight. His color was better. He smiled occasionally now, though the sadness never fully left his eyes. "Do you think it was worth it?" Rivera asked. "Everything that happened, all the pain, was the outcome worth the cost?" Robert thought about that question. About the lives saved because people started asking hard questions about forgotten installations, about the policies changed, about the accountability demanded. "Nothing will ever make up for what was taken from you," Robert said honestly. "But you turned your suffering into something that protects others. That's not worthless." Rivera nodded. "Sir, I need to tell you something. I've stopped being angry at you, for giving me those orders, for not checking on me. You were following the system just like I was. We both trusted something that didn't deserve our trust. That doesn't excuse what I did." "No," Rivera agreed. "But forgiveness isn't about excuses. It's about choosing not to let the past poison what's left of the future." They stood together in silence, 2 men bound by orders given and followed, by systems failed and lessons learned. Outside, visitors walked through the memorial, reading stories, learning history that had been buried. Children asked their parents questions. Veterans saluted the walls bearing names of the forgotten. And in the preserved room below, the life support system still hummed, not because they needed to, but because they chose to keep them running. A reminder that some things, once started, leave echoes that never fully fade. Robert had bought a bunker for $10 and found a man who had been erased from the world. In saving him, Robert had found his own redemption. The debt could never be fully repaid, but at least now it was acknowledged. At least now nobody could say it didn't matter. The bunker was no longer a tomb. It was a testament, and that made all the difference.